My name is Daniel Harmon. I have lived on this property for almost 15 years now. It sits at the edge of Rolling Meadows, a small community in western Pennsylvania. My grandfather bought this land back in the 60s, 40 acres of hardwood forest with a natural creek cutting through the eastern boundary. He built the modest three-bedroom house with his own hands, and my father expanded it when I was just a boy. When they both passed, the land came to me, the last Harmon standing. I am not a social person by nature. I keep to myself, work from home as a technical writer, and spend my free time maintaining the property. The forest provides all the company I need, or at least it did until the development started. About 8 years ago, a construction company broke ground on a luxury housing development called The Pines at Rolling Meadows. They cleared nearly 100 acres adjacent to my property and built 96 identical homes with identical lawns and identical mailboxes. I did not mind them at first. They kept to themselves and I kept to mine. A gravel road that cut across the corner of my property became their main access point. I never thought much about it. The road had always been there long before the development connecting to the main highway. Sometimes I would wave to the residents as they drove past. Most would wave back. It was civil, peaceful, until the letters started arriving. The first one appeared on my front porch on a Tuesday morning. A crisp white envelope with Rolling Meadows Homeowners Association printed in gold lettering across the top. I opened it, confused. I had never joined any HOA. Inside was a formal notice claiming I was in violation of community standards. My mailbox was the wrong color. My grass exceeded the maximum allowed height of 3 inches. I owed $200 in fines. I called the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A woman named Carla Whitmore answered. Her voice was curt, efficient, like she was reading from a script. "This must be a mistake," I told her. "I am not part of your HOA. I never signed anything." "Mr. Harmon," she replied, "your property falls within our jurisdiction. The violations have been documented with photographs. Payment is due within 30 days. "But I do not understand. My family has owned this land for decades, long before your development existed." "The rules apply to all properties visible from the pines," she said. "We have standards to maintain, property values to protect." I hung up, more bewildered than angry. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office and pulled my property records. Nothing in my deed mentioned any homeowners association. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The second letter arrived a week later. This time, the fine had doubled. New violations had been added: unapproved landscaping, lack of exterior decoration in keeping with seasonal guidelines, unauthorized vehicle storage for my grandfather's old tractor. $400. Then came the third letter, $800. The fourth, $1,600. By the fifth letter, the amount had reached $10,000, and the tone had changed from bureaucratic to threatening. Legal action would be taken. Liens would be placed on my property. Foreclosure was mentioned. I tried reasoning with them. I drove to their monthly meeting at the community clubhouse. Carla presided over it like a queen holding court. She was perhaps 50, with immaculately highlighted blonde hair cut into a precise bob. Her pantsuit looked expensive, her jewelry tasteful but substantial. The moment I walked in, the room went quiet. "Mr. Harmon," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes, "how nice of you to finally join us." "I would like to address these notices," I said, holding up the stack of papers. "I am not part of your association. I never agreed to these rules." "When you purchased property in our community, you implicitly agreed to maintain community standards," she replied. "It is all very clearly outlined in the covenant." "I did not purchase property in your community," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "My family has owned this land since before your houses even existed." A murmur went through the crowd. Carla's smile tightened. "The boundaries of our association were properly filed with the county," she said. "If you have an issue, take it up with them. Until then, your fines continue to accrue. We are now at $12,000. I left that meeting with my hands shaking. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about how quickly this had escalated, how powerless I felt. The next morning, I received a certified letter. The HOA was demanding immediate payment of all fines, now totaling $25,000, or they would proceed with legal action. I called a lawyer friend. He recommended I pull every document related to my property and the development. Something does not add up, he said. HOAs cannot just claim jurisdiction over pre-existing properties without consent. So I dug deeper. I went back to the county clerk's office and requested everything: my deed, property surveys, easements, the development plans for the Pines, their HOA bylaws. I spread them across my dining room table, creating a paper trail of ownership and boundaries. That is when I noticed something strange. In the survey map of my property, the gravel road was clearly marked as being entirely within my boundaries. No easements had been granted. No right-of-way had been established. According to every legal document, that road, the only entrance and exit to the entire Pines development, belonged to me, completely, wholly, legally. I sat back in my chair, the realization washing over me like a cold shower. They had built 96 homes with only one way in or out, and that way ran straight through my land. The discovery kept me awake that night. I paced my living room, documents spread across every surface, double-checking what I had found. The road that served as the main artery for the entire development cut across the northwestern corner of my property for approximately 400 yards. It had been there for decades, originally used by logging trucks accessing the forest beyond. When the developers built the Pines, they had simply paved over the existing gravel road and connected it to their network of cul-de-sacs and crescents. But they had never secured legal permission to use it. They had never purchased that section of land from my grandfather or my father. They had never established an easement. They had simply taken it. The next morning, I drove to the county assessor's office and spoke with Margaret, a gray-haired woman who had worked there for 30 years. I showed her my findings and asked her to verify them. "Let me check the system," she said, adjusting her glasses. She typed for several minutes, cross-referencing parcel numbers and boundary lines. Then she looked up at me, her expression serious. "You are correct, Mr. Harmon. That roadway sits entirely within your property lines. No easements or rights-of-way have been recorded." "How could the developers have built an entire community without securing proper access?" I asked. Margaret sighed. "It happens more often than you would think. They probably assumed it was a public road or that it belonged to the county. Or maybe they knew and hoped nobody would notice. Development companies cut corners all the time." "So what does this mean, legally speaking?" "It means you control access to that road. It is private property." I thanked her and left, my mind racing. I needed expert confirmation, so I called James Thornton, an old friend of my father's and one of the most respected property attorneys in the county. He agreed to meet me that afternoon. James's office smelled of leather and old books. I laid out the documents on his massive oak desk and explained the situation. He listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is extraordinary," he said. "They have been trespassing on your property for years, not just individuals, an entire development." "So I have the legal right to restrict access to that road?" I asked. "Without question," James replied. "It is no different than if they were driving through your front yard. The fact that they have been doing it for years without permission does not grant them any rights. In fact, their failure to secure proper easements shows gross negligence on the part of the developer." "And the HOA, their claims against me?" James laughed. "Completely baseless. You cannot be forced to join an HOA for property you owned prior to its formation. That would be like your neighbor deciding your house is part of his estate." "What would you recommend I do?" He thought for a moment. "For now, document everything. Keep those violation notices, record any interactions with the HOA, and do not tell them what you have discovered, not yet." "Why not?" "Because," he said, his eyes twinkling, "timing is everything in a case like this. Let them dig their hole a little deeper." I followed his advice. Over the next 2 weeks, the violation notices continued to arrive. The fines kept doubling: 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. The HOA sent a formal notice of intent to place a lien on my property. Carla left threatening voicemails about impending legal action. And all the while, I watched and waited. I drove to the county offices and filed the necessary paperwork to officially register the road as private property with restricted access rights. I researched state laws regarding private roads and property boundaries. I gathered evidence of the HOA's harassment. The final letter arrived on a Friday. It stated that I now owed $500,000 in accumulated fines and penalties. If payment was not received within 72 hours, foreclosure proceedings would begin. They had scheduled a special HOA meeting for Sunday evening to address the Harmon situation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my growing file. Then I called James. "It is time," I said. "They have threatened foreclosure." "Perfect," he replied. "Attend their meeting. Let them hang themselves with their own words, then we make our move." Sunday evening arrived with a sense of foreboding. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as I drove to the community clubhouse. The parking lot was full. This meeting had drawn a crowd. I parked my truck and straightened my tie, a rare concession to formality. This would be my last appearance as the victim. The clubhouse was modern and expensive, with vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a perfectly manicured golf course. About 50 residents filled the rows of chairs. Carla stood at a podium at the front, flanked by 4 other board members. A projector displayed a photograph of my house, with red circles highlighting alleged violations. "As you can see," Carla was saying as I walked in, "the Harmon property continues to drag down our community standards. Our property values are at risk. We have tried reasoning with him. We have issued proper notices, and yet the violations continue." I took a seat at the back. A few neighbors glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Carla noticed me and narrowed her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice honey-sweet with venom, "speak of the devil. Mr. Harmon has decided to join us. Perhaps you would like to explain to your neighbors why you feel entitled to ignore our community standards." All eyes turned to me. I remained seated. "I am not part of your community," I said calmly. "I never signed your covenant. My property predates your development by decades." Carla's smile tightened. "The boundaries of our association are clearly defined in our charter. Your property falls within those boundaries." "Show me the document where I agreed to that," I countered. "The purchase of property within our jurisdiction constitutes implicit agreement," she snapped. "I did not purchase property within your jurisdiction. My grandfather bought this land in 1963. Your houses did not exist until 2015. A murmur ran through the crowd. Carla raised her voice to speak over it. "The fact remains, Mr. Harmon, that your neglect is affecting all of us. Your eyesore of a property is visible from our entrance. Your unmaintained lawn harbors pests. Your refusal to comply with basic standards shows contempt for your neighbors." "I keep to myself," I said. "I maintain my property according to my own standards. I have never bothered any of you." "Your very existence bothers us," Carla said, her facade cracking. "You are a parasite on this community, a relic of the past unwilling to join the present. And now your stubbornness has resulted in $500,000 in fines that will be collected, one way or another." Something snapped inside me. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You have no idea what you are walking into," I said, my voice low but carrying across the now silent room. "No idea at all." I turned and walked out, leaving stunned silence behind me. My hands were trembling as I got into my truck, not from fear, but from the realization that there was no turning back now. The conflict had escalated beyond resolution. It was time to show my hand. The next morning, I called James and told him about the meeting. "They publicly threatened you and called you a parasite," he said. "Perfect. I have prepared the necessary documents to restrict access to your road. We can file them immediately." "Do it," I said, "and I want to hire security to help enforce it." "Already arranged," James replied. "I know a company that specializes in private property protection. They can have signs, barriers, and personnel in place by tomorrow night." What about emergency vehicles, school buses? We will establish clear protocols. Emergency services will always have access. For school buses and delivery services, we will notify them officially of the change in status. They will need to make alternative arrangements. I spent that day preparing. I purchased security cameras and installed them overlooking the road. I bought a heavy-duty gate that could be installed across the full width of the pavement. I printed copies of my property deed and survey maps. That evening, as darkness fell, a van arrived carrying 4 men in security uniforms. Their leader, a former police officer named Mike, shook my hand firmly. "We understand the situation," he said. "We will make sure everything is handled professionally and legally." They worked through the night. By dawn, large signs had been posted at both ends of my section of road. Private property, no TRSBSSING. VIOLATORS will be PROSSUTD. The heavy gate was installed at the entrance closest to the highway, currently left open but ready to be closed. Security cameras overlooked every approach. I stood at my window as the first light of morning illuminated my handiwork. Today, the residents of the Pines would learn that actions have consequences. Today, Carla would learn that she had picked the wrong man to bully. At exactly 7:15 a.m., right when the first commuters would be leaving for work, I gave Mike the signal. He closed and locked the gate. Then we waited. The first car appeared at 7:22 a.m. A silver BMW slowed to a stop in front of the gate. The driver, a man in a business suit, got out and approached the sign. He read it twice, then looked around in confusion. He spotted Mike in his security uniform. "What is going on here?" he asked. "I need to get to work." "This is private property, sir," Mike explained calmly. "The owner has restricted access." "Private property. This is the main road to our community." "It is a private road that crosses Mr. Harmon's land. He has exercised his legal right to control access." The man's face reddened. "This is ridiculous. I am calling the HOA." More cars began to queue behind the BMW. Drivers got out, gathering around the gate. Phones appeared, voices raised. By 7:45, at least 30 residents were blocked, their morning commutes halted by my gate and my signs. At 8:10, a familiar golf cart came speeding down the road from the direction of the clubhouse. Carla Whitmore, still in her bathrobe, her hair uncombed, jumped out and stormed toward the gate. Her face was a mask of fury as she confronted Mike. "Remove this gate immediately," she demanded. "This is illegal." "I am afraid I cannot do that, ma'am," Mike replied, handing her a copy of my property deed and survey. "This road is legally owned by Mr. Harmon. He has authorized me to restrict access." "This is absurd. This road services our entire community. Without an easement or right-of-way agreement, it remains private property." Carla snatched the papers from his hand and scanned them frantically. "I am calling the police," she snapped, pulling out her phone. "Feel free," Mike said. "They have already been notified of the situation." 20 minutes later, 2 police cruisers arrived. Officer Jenkins, whom I knew from around town, assessed the situation with professional detachment. He reviewed my documentation, consulted with the county via radio, and then approached the growing crowd of residents. "Folks," he announced, "I have verified that this road is indeed private property belonging to Mr. Harmon. He has the legal right to restrict access." "This is holding us hostage," Carla shouted. "There must be some law against this." "Actually, ma'am," Officer Jenkins replied, "the law is quite clear on this matter. The development company should have secured proper easements before building homes with only one access point. They failed to do so." "So we are just trapped here?" a woman asked, panic in her voice. "You will need to work out an arrangement with Mr. Harmon," the officer said. "Until then, yes, you legally cannot cross his property without permission." Carla turned to the crowd. "Everyone back to the clubhouse. Emergency meeting right now." As the residents began trudging back toward their homes, she fixed me with a venomous glare. "This is not over, Harmon." By noon, the situation had escalated further. School buses could not enter to drop off children. Mail delivery was halted at the gate. A garbage truck was turned away. The pines at Rolling Meadows had effectively been cut off from the outside world. News traveled fast in our small town. By mid-afternoon, a local news van had arrived. A reporter with perfectly styled hair interviewed residents through the fence of my gate. Their outrage made for compelling television. "We are being held prisoner in our own homes," one woman told the camera. "My children had to walk 2 miles from where the school bus dropped them off," another said. "This is a clear abuse of power," Carla insisted when it was her turn. "Mr. Harmon is using a legal technicality to punish an entire community." When the reporter approached me for comment, I simply handed her copies of the HOA violation notices, the threatening letters, and my property deed. $500,000 in fines for property I have owned since before their houses existed, I said quietly. "They tried to take my home. Now they understand what it feels like to have your freedom restricted." Throughout the day, individual residents approached the gate. Some pleaded, some offered money. Some apologized for the HOA's actions, claiming they had no idea what had been happening. Others threatened lawsuits and retribution. I remained firm. This was not about extracting revenge from individual homeowners. This was about accountability, about standing up to bullies who had pushed too far. As evening fell, James arrived with a formal cease and desist letter addressed to the Rolling Meadows Homeowners Association. It demanded immediate withdrawal of all violation notices and fines against my property, a formal written apology, and $200,000 in damages for harassment and emotional distress. "In exchange," the letter concluded, "Mr. Harmon will consider negotiating an easement agreement allowing restricted access to the road crossing his property." I handed the letter to a security guard to deliver to the clubhouse. Then I went home and slept better than I had in months. The tables had turned. The power had shifted. Now they would know what it felt like to be at someone else's mercy. By morning, word had spread throughout the Pines that their HOA had made a catastrophic error. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact with me were now openly questioning Carla's leadership. Emergency vehicles had been granted access, but nothing else. Children were being picked up and dropped off at the gate by their parents, who then had to walk them home. Deliveries piled up at the barrier. At 10:00 a.m., my phone rang. It was James. "They want to meet," he said. "The entire board and as many residents as can fit in the clubhouse. They are requesting your presence to negotiate terms." "When?" "Noon today. I will be there with you, of course." I agreed to the meeting. At precisely noon, James and I walked into the clubhouse. The atmosphere was tense, the room packed with residents. Carla and the board members sat at a table at the front, their expressions grim. The crowd parted silently as we walked to the chairs that had been set up for us. Carla cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harmon. We are here to discuss a resolution to this situation." "I believe you received my terms," I replied. "Your demands are excessive," she said. $200,000 is an unreasonable amount for what amounts to a misunderstanding. James opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. "A misunderstanding," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "We have documented over 50 instances of harassment, false claims, and threats against my client. You attempted to extort $500,000 from him and threatened to take his home. These actions constitute harassment, fraud, and attempted theft through intimidation." He placed a stack of papers on the table. "Here is a draft of the lawsuit we are prepared to file this afternoon if an agreement cannot be reached. It names not only the HOA as an entity, but each board member individually. The damages sought total $1 million, plus additional punitive damages to be determined by a jury." The color drained from Carla's face. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Additionally," James continued, "we have prepared documentation for the county prosecutor regarding possible criminal charges for attempted extortion and fraud." A man in the front row stood up. "I am Richard Davis, a resident here and also an attorney. May I review these documents?" James handed them over. Richard spent several minutes flipping through the pages, his expression growing increasingly concerned. Finally, he turned to address the crowd. Speaking as a member of this community, not as legal counsel, I must advise that these claims appear substantive. The documentation shows clear overreach by our HOA. Mr. Harmon's property is demonstrably not part of our association, and the road in question is unequivocally on his land. Carla attempted to regain control. This is not helpful, Richard. We are here to negotiate a reasonable solution. A reasonable solution would have been to leave me alone, I said, speaking directly to the residents rather than the board. I never bothered any of you. I kept to myself. I maintained my property according to standards that long predate your community. Yet your HOA decided I was a problem to be eliminated. An older woman stood up from her seat. I voted against pursuing action against Mr. Harmon's property. I told the board it seemed wrong, but Carla insisted it was for the good of the community. We were protecting property values, Carla snapped. By attempting to steal my property, I countered. By making my life miserable for months. By threatening me with financial ruin for violations of rules I never agreed to follow. The mood in the room had shifted palpably. The anger that had been directed at me was now turning toward Carla and the board. Here are my terms, I said firmly. First, all violation notices against my property are permanently withdrawn. Second, a formal written apology is issued and published in the local newspaper. Third, compensation in the amount of $200,000 for the harassment and emotional distress I have endured. That is ridiculous, Carla exclaimed. Fourth, I continued as if she hadn't spoken, we will establish a formal easement agreement for the road, with an annual maintenance fee paid by the HOA to me as the property owner. And if we refuse, Carla challenged, then the road remains closed indefinitely while we pursue legal action against you personally and the HOA as an entity. Your residents remain cut off from essential services. Your property values plummet as word spreads that the Pines has no legal access to the outside world. The clubhouse erupted into angry shouts, not at me but at Carla and the board. A middle-aged man stood up, raising his voice above the din. I move that we accept Mr. Harmon's terms immediately and call for the resignation of the entire board. The motion was seconded by dozens of voices. Richard Davis, the lawyer, called for an immediate vote. The result was overwhelming. The residents wanted the road opened and they wanted new leadership. Carla sat rigid in her chair, her facade finally crumbling as she realized her position was untenable. The other board members, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly distanced themselves from her. We had no idea she was pursuing such aggressive action, one of them claimed. Carla assured us this was all being handled properly. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, temporary leadership had been established. The new acting president, a retired judge named Walter, signed the agreement I had prepared. The apology would be issued. The payment would be made from the HOA's legal defense fund. The easement agreement would be formalized within 30 days. As James and I walked out of the clubhouse, Walter approached me privately. I want you to know that many of us had no idea what was happening, he said. Carla ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom. Financial reports were vague. Decisions were made without proper votes. That ends today. I nodded, not quite ready to forgive, but appreciative of the gesture. The gate will be opened as soon as the payment clears, I said. Emergency vehicles can continue to pass in the meantime. That evening, as the sun set over my property, I watched from my porch as life began returning to normal in the Pines. The first installment of the settlement had been wired to my account. The gate had been opened. The security team remained in place, but with instructions to allow residents to pass freely. I had won, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like the end of a long, unnecessary battle that should never have begun. The aftermath came swiftly. Within a week, an emergency election was held for a new HOA board. Walter, the retired judge, was formally elected president. His first official act was to commission an independent audit of the association's finances under Carla's leadership. The results were damning. For years, Carla had been using HOA funds as her personal slush fund. Spa treatments, luxury dinners, even a vacation to Barbados had been disguised as community outreach expenses or professional development. The fines collected from residents for minor violations, a garbage can left out too long, holiday decorations not removed promptly, had gone into an account that only she controlled. As these revelations came to light, more residents began to speak out about their own experiences. One family had been fined repeatedly because their autistic child's therapy equipment in their backyard was deemed unsightly. An elderly widow had been threatened with foreclosure over unpainted trim on her garage. A young couple had been denied permission to install solar panels despite state laws protecting renewable energy initiatives. The pattern was clear. Carla had wielded the HOA's power not to improve the community but to control it, to bend it to her aesthetic vision and personal benefit. Legal consequences followed. The county prosecutor opened an investigation into financial mismanagement. The state attorney general's office began looking into possible violations of housing discrimination laws. The local real estate licensing board, Carla was a part-time realtor, launched an ethics inquiry. 2 weeks after our agreement was signed, I received a copy of the formal apology published in the Meadowbrook Gazette. It acknowledged that my property was not subject to HOA regulations, that the road crossing my land was legally mine, and that the actions taken against me had been unauthorized and inappropriate. What gave me the most satisfaction, however, was not the public humiliation of Carla or the financial settlement. It was watching the community transform. Under Walter's leadership, the draconian rules began to be relaxed. Children's laughter returned to front yards. Gardens became expressions of individual taste rather than conformity. The Pines began to feel less like a sterile showcase and more like a neighborhood. Carla held out for as long as she could. She refused to attend HOA meetings, sending angry emails instead. She rejected the findings of the audit, claiming financial records had been manipulated. She even attempted to form a splinter group of like-minded residents committed to maintaining proper standards. But her support had evaporated. The same neighbors who had once feared her now avoided her entirely. Her carefully cultivated social circle abandoned her. Even her closest allies on the former board distanced themselves, claiming they had been misled about the extent of her actions. The final blow came 3 months after our confrontation. The county prosecutor charged Carla with misappropriation of funds and fraud. Rather than face a public trial, she accepted a plea deal that included financial restitution, community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. One crisp autumn morning, I stood at my property line and watched as a moving truck backed up to Carla's grand house at the entrance to the Pines. Movers carried out furniture and boxes. Carla supervised with rigid posture and sunglasses hiding her eyes. As the last items were loaded, she glanced in my direction. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply stood on my land that had been in my family for generations, land that she had tried to control and could not. She looked away first, climbing into her luxury SUV and driving away from the Pines for the last time. As she passed through the section of road on my property, she did not look left or right. She simply stared straight ahead, a queen deposed, a tyrant toppled by her own hubris. The community she left behind began to heal. Property values, contrary to what she had claimed, did not fall with the relaxation of strict aesthetic controls. If anything, the Pines became more desirable as word spread that its HOA had become reasonable and resident-focused. Walter made a point of consulting me on matters related to the road. The easement agreement we formalized included not only maintenance fees, but also environmental protections for the surrounding woodland. The section of forest where my property met the Pines became a small nature preserve, with walking trails accessible to all residents. I remained separate but no longer isolated. Neighbors would wave or stop to chat when they saw me working outside. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others simply expressed gratitude that things had changed for the better. The irony was not lost on me. In trying to force me out, Carla had ultimately forced herself out. In trying to control the community, she had lost everything. And in standing my ground, I had not only protected what was mine, but had inadvertently helped free 96 families from petty tyranny. I was moved by the gesture, though still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. After they left, I placed the plaque not in my house, but in the workshop, where my grandfather and father had taught me the value of standing firm for what you believe is right. One morning, about 18 months after the confrontation, I was checking the fence line when I noticed a young couple walking along the road, pushing a stroller. They waved as they approached. "Mr. Harmon," the woman called out, "do you have a minute?" I nodded, walking over to meet them. "We bought the Wilson place last month," the man explained, referring to a house near the back of the Pines. "We have heard the story about what happened with the road and the old HOA president." "Ancient history now," I said, not particularly wanting to rehash those events. "We just wanted to say thank you," the woman said. "We looked at several neighborhoods before choosing this one. The others had such strict rules: no vegetable gardens visible from the street, no play equipment, approval required for every exterior change. When we heard how things changed here because of you, it made our decision easy." I looked down at their baby, sleeping peacefully in the stroller, and thought about how different their experience would be from what residents had endured under Carla's reign. "I just stood up for what was mine," I said simply. "You did more than that," the man replied. "You showed that one person can make a difference when they are in the right and willing to hold their ground." As they continued their walk, I reflected on their words. I had never set out to be any kind of community hero. I had simply wanted to be left alone, to live as I chose on land that had been in my family for generations. Yet in defending my borders, I had helped others reclaim theirs. In refusing to bend to unreasonable demands, I had created space for reason to prevail. The road that Carla had seen as a weapon to use against me had become instead the path to a more balanced community. That weekend, I put up one last sign at the point where my property met the Pines. Unlike the harsh warnings from the height of our conflict, this one was simple, carved in wood like my grandfather might have made. "Private property, tread carefully, respect mutually." Walter noticed it during one of his walks and stopped to read it. He nodded his approval. "Just the right message," he said, "firm but fair." "That is all I ever wanted," I replied, "to be treated with the same respect I show others." "Carla never understood that," Walter mused. "She saw respect as something to be demanded, not earned." "Where did she end up?" I asked, realizing I had never heard what became of her after she moved away. "Last I heard, she bought a condo in a high-rise downtown. No yard to maintain, no neighbors to monitor. Maybe she finally learned her lesson about trying to control others." I doubted that. People like Carla rarely changed. They just found new targets, new battles, new ways to assert control. But that was no longer my concern. My land remained my own. The road continued to serve its purpose without controversy. The HOA had transformed from an instrument of tyranny into a tool for community cooperation, and I had reclaimed not just my property rights but also my peace of mind. Sometimes, especially in the early morning when mist rises from the creek at the eastern edge of my property, I walk the boundaries my grandfather established decades ago. I touch the trees he planted, feel the soil he tilled, and am reminded that some things are worth fighting for. Not out of pettiness or revenge, but because they matter, because they are yours to protect, because standing up to bullies is not just about winning the fight, it is about preventing the next one. The residents of the Pines now understand what Carla never could. That being a good neighbor does not mean controlling others, but respecting their boundaries. That rules without reason become weapons, not protections. That community is built on cooperation, not coercion. As for me, I remain the quiet man at the end of the road. I keep my grass at the height I choose. I paint my mailbox the color I prefer. I park my grandfather's tractor wherever I damn well please. And when I raise my hand to wave at passing neighbors, they wave back not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine goodwill.